I mean, my mom struggled with alcohol use disorder, alcoholism, whatever, whatever people want to call it that works for them, my whole life. But she drank white wine and I wasn't drinking white wine. So like, I'm fine. This,
Hmm.
everyone's like, Hayley, you got to be careful. It runs in your family. And I'm like, I'm fine. That's not going to happen to me.
Happy Sober Day, friends. Welcome to the Sobriety Diaries. My name is Nate. I am a grateful recovering alcoholic, 7 years from my last drink. The Sobriety Diaries is a video podcast where we share powerful stories of recovery told by those who lived them. Check us out at thesobrietydiaries.com for all things podcast related. And for all our video interviews, head over to youtube.com/Nate Kelly. Also, please share this podcast with just one person in your life who may still be struggling. You just never know what they may need to hear today. Recovery is possible. I am here with my new friend, Hayley Scherders. Hayley, good morning. How are you, my friend?
Good morning. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Kicking off the weekend with a great conversation about recovery. I couldn't ask for more, really. So thank you for being here this morning. I'm excited to hear more about your story.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited.
You're on a frigid lake in Ontario,
I
correct?
am.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. It's chilly. I did a polar dip like 2 weeks ago because I was like, I
Wow.
gotta try it. Yeah, it was cold, but it was awesome. It was really good.
Do you feel the benefit that I see everywhere on TikTok and whatnot with these ice plunges, like the awakening of your spirit, so to say?
I felt super empowered. And now
Yeah,
I'm like, maybe I need to be doing it in a more routine sense, but it's a mind thing to be like,
right.
yeah, because I'm looking at it right now. I'm like, yeah, I want to go walk in and, but
Yes.
this,
Voluntarily.
yeah, but you push through 30 seconds and all of a sudden you're like, I can do anything. So like
Absolutely.
that feeling alone is like, that's worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always looking to add things to learn more about myself or
Yeah.
sort of strengthen my personal development. Meditation has been huge for me over the last couple years, and I don't know, I hear great things about it. Aside from doing like the polar plunge or like these activity related events, I see a lot of people that just get a big ass bin and put it in their backyard and do like these daily plunges, and I'm like,
Yeah.
could I do that?
I know. I have asked myself that so many times. I'm like, maybe a tub would be easier. And then I'm like, is that just my mind trying to
Yeah.
make it? Yeah. And I'm like, I got to figure this out. Maybe if I do it like 3 more times, I'll decide to invest
Right.
in a
Right.
tub.
Right. Well, Hayley, we chatted a little before we hit record, but I know that you've been inspired a bit by This Naked Mind, and you're a certified coach through their program. So I want to talk about that and the services that you can offer our listeners. But let's start by learning a little bit more about Hayley and walk through your personal journey.
Yes. Okay. So I mean, it's always interesting because I'm like, there's so much. And I'm sure everyone who's been on these journeys thinks that, right? It's interesting 2 years into my sobriety, I'll reflect on like what got me to where I was. And a year ago, still sober, I reflect on it differently than I'm reflecting on it
Mm,
now. Like the growth you have within your years, you'll see things different. It's really
it's
interesting.
so
But
true. Yeah.
right? Like it's weird. All of a sudden I'm having these realizations and I'm like, a year ago I didn't think that. And
Yeah.
I can just I
It
and it almost
continues. It continues to happen. I just celebrated 7 years, and I tell my story differently. It's not
yeah,
that there are different details or I was dishonest in the way that I used to tell it, but different
totally.
things become important and different. You look back
Yes.
on different turning points or things
Yeah,
that propelled you to perhaps a different phase of
totally.
your recovery that you didn't
Yeah.
necessarily deem important before. But
Yeah.
I
It-
totally feel what you're saying.
yeah, it's fascinating, which is so neat. But I was always a binge drinker. And again, I can look back and I'm like, oh, the signs were all there.
Right, right.
But you do your best with the tools you have at the time. So I grew up in a small town and underage drinking was very normal. And I know it still is in many places. And I also understand that not every single person develops a problem, but I was always all or nothing. And at one point in time during like my 20s, I thought I could just have a glass and I just enjoyed a glass or
Mm,
two of wine. but it was always a bottle.
Yep.
It was never one or two. And I don't know how I
Never.
didn't
I don't
realize.
understand those people. It just, if I
Yeah.
opened a bottle or got a case of beer, I drank until it was gone.
Oh my gosh. I
Yeah.
always find it. Someone said that to me. They said, I don't understand when someone doesn't have an off switch. And I said, I'm fascinated because I don't understand someone who does. But I
Right.
love being able to have that conversation with someone where like I don't feel shame about it. There's not a stigma, like where it's an open dialogue. And for her, she was like, wow, that's fascinating. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just we're different. We're
Yep.
totally
That's why I
different.
love these conversations. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. So yes, I was okay. So I was a binge drinker growing up, and I can still take myself back to the days where I genuinely physically and consciously didn't feel like I was intoxicated. And people would be like, "Oh, Hayley, are you drinking?" And I'd be like, "No, no."
Yep.
And in my mind, I was convinced that like, no, you seem fine. You're not slurring. You're good. And I can look back so many times to so many people and I'm like, oh my gosh. And that's been a realization years later is like, as much as there was other toxic people in my life and unhealthy relationships, sure, I wasn't a healthy person either. I was that toxic person to other people. And I'm like,
Yep.
so
Cringe.
sorry. Yeah. So I was a binge drinker. Hate, I hate admitting that I drove when I shouldn't. I was a bartender in the city. We would all drink after work and then you do it so many times that like, you think that's
Probably my biggest regret during active addiction because
normal.
honestly, I probably did it every day. And
Yeah.
by the grace of God, nothing ever happened. But oh, you hear these horror stories. And yeah, it's probably my biggest regret.
Yeah. That's what someone asked me. They're like, is there anything that you haven't been able to forgive yourself for? And I was like, honestly, that would be
Yep.
it. Driving. And I mean, the pain that I put my family and
Of
friends through,
course.
but
Yeah.
that all goes hand in hand, right? So yeah, binge drinker, blackout. And I can look back and be like, I was a Jekyll and Hyde drinker.
Mm.
I was like, woo, fun, nice, until suddenly I wasn't. And I can honestly reflect on that and say that that was the insecure version of me that would come out. It
Right.
wasn't that even if I was mean to someone, it wasn't because I didn't like them. It would be something that I thought was great about them or admired that I was jealous and insecure about. So I was
Ugh.
coming in,
Yeah.
shots fired, because then I would be like, where did that come from? Why? Like I would never say things like that sober or be like outwardly mean to someone. And I'm like, where does that come from? And I was like, oh, upon
The
reflection.
booze. Was there
The
anything in particular that would set you off or flip that switch, or it was just kind of
I
situational?
honestly, I think it was situational, and I think it was just once I reached a certain point, the switch was flipped,
Yeah.
which, and then what do you get with that? You get anxiety. So
Yes.
that's great. 3 a.m. you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, what did I say? This is horrible. And then, I mean, my mom struggled with alcohol use disorder, alcoholism, whatever people want to call it that
Yeah.
works for them, my whole life. But she drank white wine and I wasn't drinking white wine. So like, I'm fine. This,
Hmm.
everyone's like, Hayley, you got to be careful. It runs in your family. And I'm like, I'm fine. And that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
That's like the
Exactly. Yeah.
famous thought. It's so hard to think back on the messy drunk girl or the mean girl. And I would prior to that, I believe myself to be a kind person, a nice person. Like I wouldn't behave that way, but it was just this alter ego. And so in my 20s down in the city, I got introduced to cocaine. And well, isn't that the best, worst combination of life?
Yes. It
uh,
enables us to drink more, right? As if we need anything to make that happen.
like, no.
I had a phase, a couple years
Yeah.
probably, where cocaine was introduced to the mix. And that's all it did. It kept us up later and allowed us to drink more and make more bad decisions
Yeah.
and more things that we regret. Really, that's all that it did.
Yes. And that's the thing. I'm like, ooh, for me, it's okay. Well, suddenly you're not falling over anymore, and
Yeah.
you're not. I wouldn't switch to that mean girl. So like, I found the mother load. This is great, and it's so not, because the whole time that you think like, no, I'm good and I'm balanced, it's like that little addiction beast is just brewing
Ugh,
inside of you, and I'm like, no.
so true.
A lot of things were going not so great in my life, which again, I can reflect on this now and say that I was just as toxic as the toxic things in my life. But, and I mean, drugs and alcohol were at the forefront of everything. My mom's health was failing at the time. She got early onset dementia, two types of cancer in her breast, and an aggressive form of cancer in her tongue. So she was in a long-term nursing care home facility. That was all very hard. I was in an unhealthy relationship. It was basically a codependent relationship, and just nothing about it was healthy or supportive. So what do I use as my coping mechanism other than drugs and alcohol? Right? Because and people would say to me, you know, Hayley, like, you don't have to do it alone. And at that point in time, people would say like, oh, you look really skinny. And I was like, oh,
Thank
thanks. Do
you.
I? And I'm like, oh, you guys are saying I look sick.
Yeah.
That makes sense, because now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even pull my pants up, even like past my calf, with how much weight I had lost. So really bad. And then I hadn't slept for an entire weekend. I decided to drive when I should not have driven. And I thank God I didn't kill anyone. I thank
Yeah.
God. I thank God. I rolled my vehicle. I had 3 brain bleeds and a grade 3 concussion.
Wow.
Yeah,
Did you doze off or was it just
I have
distracted or yeah,
I
no.
have zero recollection. Could have dozed off. I could have had a seizure. I had
Yeah.
had seizures before with cocaine use. Again, not again when you know you have all of these warning signs, and that I think that's probably another regret. And not that I have regrets, just things that I see differently now,
Yeah.
but I remember multiple times in my stomach feeling like, Hayley, this is going to go bad.
Mm,
This is going to turn. You got to get ahead of this. Like your luck's going to run out.
right.
And I didn't listen to that intuition, and it did run out. So after I don't know, that I can't even remember really the timeline on that, but after recovering from the injury, which is I deemed miraculous, like completely miraculous, months later, I still ended up drinking, which, like, anyone from the outside looking in, logic would be like, what on earth? Like, and that was the pull, and how addicted at that point in time that I was. And it's crazy to me to think of now, because I'm like, you couldn't pay me. Like, I
Ugh,
know that there's nothing in it for me, and I am so grateful for that. But it is terrifying to think like that could happen. I was on death's door.
yeah.
Let's grab another
Let's
one.
grab another one. I had a
Let's
similar situation and I had a stroke at the age of 32 as a direct result of my alcoholism, laid in the ICU neuro wing for almost 6 weeks with the inpatient uh, physical rehabilitation as
Yeah,
well. Had to learn to walk again and thought about booze every day in the hospital. Yes, from the outside in,
yeah,
people that don't understand addiction are
yeah,
like, what in the ever loving fuck are you doing?
yeah,
But that pull was still so strong that I couldn't, it was the only coping mechanism that I had. So I
yeah,
had just been through this medical trauma, this life
yeah.
altering situation. How was I going to deal with that? Booze is the only thing that I
Yeah.
knew.
That was the only tool at the time, right?
Only
Like that.
tool.
Yeah. Oh, which is that's so crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah. So I woke up one morning extremely hungover, obviously, because
Mm.
at that point it was just rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And I felt guilty. I constantly felt anxious. And my dad is the most supportive, amazing human. But and at one point, in the most supportive way, he said, Hayley, what's it gonna take? Like what's your stop here? And he just wanted to help me but didn't know how, and I completely get that. And I said, do you think that I wake up and want to drink? Like, do you think that I want this to be happening? And days later he was like, that actually, he's like, I heard that so differently. And he's like, because I did think you wanted to be doing this. And he
Mm.
didn't think that I wasn't thinking, he thought, sorry, that I wasn't thinking about people and that I was just like, I don't care if this hurts you, but it's no, I feel out of control at this point in time. This is what my brain, when I open my eyes, I'm thinking about, I don't want this,
Right.
but that was the process. So I woke up one morning and I called a detox center that was like an hour from me. And I asked them if I could go there that night. I had this overwhelming, just, if you want to change, you got to do something, and you got to do something big. I just needed it to be inaccessible to me.
Yes.
I didn't know what it was going to look like. I didn't have a plan. I needed that space.